Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today we are going to talk about the books that I read in the last month of the previous year. So today is my December wrap-up. I know it's quite a late wrap-up for me, and in general because of scheduling issues and just a lot of stress going on right now, all my end of the year videos are kind of moving back a bit. Usually I like to have them up in the first half of January. This year we'll have them in the second half of January, maybe moving into February, depending on how I'll do, just warning you. Anyway, the last month of the year was actually a quite successful reading month. I would say, like, I read the same amount that I usually, or the same average that I usually read in most of the other months. So I read 6 books. Obviously, I pulled up my stats from Storygraph once again. Storygraph tells me that the moods that I had this month were emotional, adventurous, funny, tense, mysterious, light-hearted, and dark. I don't think we had light-hearted so far this year. In terms of pace, for those of you who don't know how Storygraph works, which by the way crashed quite a bit around the beginning of the year because just a lot of people moved over to Storygraph at the beginning of the year. But you can make different judgments on the books if you review them, like how is the pace, which moods do they include, is it character driven, is it not? And then Storygraph will tell you, you know, most people put this book in this category. So in terms of pace, most of the books that I read this month were judged as medium paced. And then there was one book that was judged as fast-paced. I read 4 books that were between 300 and 500 pages, and then the rest was books that were over 500 pages. So 2 books over 500 pages. I only read fiction. In terms of genres, I don't quite like how Storygraph does genres because they put YA and LGBTQ as genres, which aren't genres, but anyway. We had fantasy, young adult, romance, middle grade, LGBTQ, thriller, mystery, and historical. I read 1 digital copy, the rest was print, so 1 ebook, the rest was print. 5 of the books I read were in English, 1 was in German, and my average rating was 4.8, so quite good, but part of the reason is that I had 2 5 stars because one of those 5 stars is a reread, or was a reread. But specifically I had 1 3 star, 1 3.25 star, 1 3.75 star, 1 4.5 star, and 1 5 star book. And then in terms of my diversity stats that, as always, I don't get from Storygraph, I do myself. I have 2 books that were written by BIPOC authors. Yeah, 2 books written by BIPOC authors. Then I had 1, 2, 3 books that were queer, and I'm not quite sure if I can say that the books, like, I think one of the books had the main character have ADHD. It wasn't explicit, but the way she was described was very ADHD. Yeah, aside from that, I don't think I had any disability and mental illness rep. So yes, let's get into it, and let's, as always, start with my lowest rating, which in this case was a 3 star, which I gave to Godly Heathens by H.E. Edgmon, which is the first book in the Ouroboros duology, I believe it's going to be. So I believe it's going to be only 2 books. This is a YA written by, or urban paranormal fantasy written by an Indigenous author, an Indigenous queer author. So I originally had intended to read it in November, didn't get to it in November. I had an arc of this. I finally got to it in December. And for me, I believe this was just one of those cases of it wasn't necessarily for me. I mean, there are some definite issues that I have with the book and with some writing choices that were made, but overall also it's kind of a bad habit of mine, I would say, that often, while I know that I 9 times out of 10 tend to not really enjoy, or even if I enjoy it, I tend to not love YA. It's just not the writing style for me with most YA books. There's exceptions. We'll get to some of those exceptions actually later in this video, because funnily enough, both my lowest rated and my highest rated book this month were YA books. But anyway, I tend to not enjoy them. However, especially with books that are written by authors from marginalized communities, they often have prompts that sound really interesting, so I then, you know, get overcome with the need to give it another try, and then I end up being like, well, it wasn't for me. I should have known it wasn't for me, but I gave it a try anyway. So this is one of those books with the things that I say, that I gave it 3 stars. I do think it's a good YA book. I think if you enjoy YA, you might enjoy this book also. I just overall didn't particularly enjoy the pacing of the story. Usually it's like the pacing of the story that I have issues with in YA. It's just too fast-paced for my personal liking. So, but what is this book about? This book is about a trans teen who I forgot the name of, and they actually, I did have 2 books, now that I remember it. I did have 2 books with mental illness rep, because this teen deals a lot with depression, I believe it was, and growing up trans in a kind of rural town in, I believe it was Kansas or somewhere in the South, didn't really help them. I forgot if it was they, them, or he, him right now, so I'm just gonna use they, them. Can you tell that I don't remember shit about books? Anyway, also it was written in first-person perspective, so you hardly ever get to hear their pronouns. So anyway, so this young indigenous trans teen is just, you know, living daily life, just waiting until they can leave this town and leave for New York. Until one day a weird girl comes to school, and they're attacked by another weird girl, and just a lot of stuff starts happening all at once, and they find out that they are the reincarnation of a god from a different world. It's like, the premise is so interesting, and I also found it really interesting because you had all these characters who kind of knew each other from previous lives and cared about each other a lot from previous lives, but who partially didn't have any memories of each other, and that's, to be honest, a trope that I really enjoy. However, that's where personally my biggest issue with the book came in, where I didn't 100% end up loving it. I could have given it more based on my enjoyment of the story, but that was like the big thing where I was like, nah, it's really only a 3-star for me, and that is that the way these past lives and these connections were brought across in the book just wasn't enough for me. And I felt like we could have done more with flashbacks. We could have fleshed out those characters and those relationships a lot more, and that wasn't there for me. And so I thought that was like really kind of sad, but I think that's also due once again to the restrictions of the YA genre, because you have less word count, and so you have a lot of things that you have to get into this book, and some things are just left on the wayside, and for me that was one thing that was left on the wayside for me. So yeah, that's why I ended up giving it 3 stars. However, if you read YA, do be aware that for a YA, this book sometimes does get quite crude. I didn't mind that, but you know, just be aware of that. Maybe this is more a book for older YA readers, if you intend to give this book to a child. Continuing on, we have our 3.25 star read, and I might have finally found my subgenre of fantasy romance that I every now and again might enjoy. and that was with A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley. This is also urban fantasy, and it follows this witch who is, first of all, was prophesied to be the greatest witch ever at some point. However, she is quite a disappointment to her family that is this legacy family in terms of witchcraft and power and wizardry and everything, because she just tends to constantly fuck up her summonings and just, you know, all her magic except for her plant magic, in which she is quite good at, but for her mother, plant magic just isn't good enough. Until one day she fucks up summoning Flower and instead summons one of the most feared demons from hell. This demon, however, also has a problem, and that is that while he used to be the greatest demon and like soul stealer and everything, he recently accidentally acquired a human soul. And so now he's kind of become laughingstock, and being accidentally summoned by this witch, maybe stealing her soul, might bring him back in the good graces of his mentor. And so it's kind of about the two of them and them also kind of trying to save the nature of the town, and it's fun. Did I enjoy the romance itself that much? I mean, I don't know if it's just me that, you know, I am very particular about my romances, and so a lot of times I'm like, yeah, you know, it was fun, it was fine, whatever. But the thing that I really enjoyed with this one is that I can finally turn my brain off when it comes to fantasy romance, because a lot of times when it comes to fantasy romance, especially when fantasy romance, and I think that's the issue, that I mostly read fantasy romance in that regard, that has, you know, a more major political or world building side plot, be it high fantasy or be it low fantasy, like with Freya Maska's series. I read them, but they always feel lacking to me because I don't want the story to focus that much on the romance. I want to focus it more on the political. Same with things like A Taste of Gold and Iron. I don't want the story to focus that much on the romance. I want to focus it more on the world building and the political. However, with this one, there's hardly any politics. The politics and the fantasy is more just like a spice in there, which makes the romance more enjoyable to me than, you know, contemporary romance. But I can fully focus on the romance and enjoy it, and just enjoy the relationship drama going on. And so actually I had fun with this one. It was a 3.25 star. I don't think I would ever give this type of book more than 4 stars, because it's just not what my preference is, not because romance is bad as a genre or anything. But yeah, so I was quite happy about that, and I probably would have never bought this one, but a colleague of mine has this one and also the second one, and so she lent both of them to me. Moving to my 3.5 star book, and that was Crucial's Mercy by Jacqueline Carey. I will keep myself short on this one. This is the last book in Imral's trilogy, which is the second trilogy within the Crucial's Legacy universe, I guess you could say. The first one was Phaedra's trilogy, and it's kind of a realm of the Elderlings type thing where you can kind of, you know, you have a difficult time summarizing a later series without spoiling the first. The first one follows Phaedra, who is a courtesan spy, so she was born into the night courts within this country. She has grown up to learn the arts of sex, basically, which is a big deal, like a very religious thing within this country. However, she as a young girl was also taken in by this kind of noble who also showed her the arts of covertcy, and so from then on she kind of started using sex as a way to spy for him, and through that also kind of gets entrenched in the politics of her country. And in the second book we follow a different character, one that we already meet in the first book, and who kind of went through like a lot of very terrible things in the first series, and the second series kind of follows him coming to terms with what happened to him in his youth, in his youth, but also coming to terms with who his family is, etc., and his role within society. It's kind of funny because with the first series as well, the first one was my favorite and the last one was my least favorite, with the second one being my favorite in terms of relationship developments, and with this series it was kind of very similar. The first one very clearly was my favorite of the three. The last one I didn't enjoy quite as much. Part of the reason why I think I didn't enjoy it quite as much is because this third one does this really interesting thing where our main character, our POV character, technically isn't the main character of the story and is very much more so a supporting character to the other stuff that is going on. So that's just a very interesting thing to notice, but I will have a full review of the entire trilogy up, so I will talk more about that then. I just realized usually I start talking about rereads, right? And I did have a reread. I didn't talk about it first, so let's just slot it in here because that was technically my second 5-star read for the month, and that was Ink Spell, I believe it's called in English. Like, I think it's like Ink Blood, Ink Spell, Ink Death. Not Ink Blood, Ink Heart, Ink Spell, Ink Death. This is the second book in the Ink Heart series, and I'm obviously doing my reread of this so I can get to the fourth book, which came out in September, I believe. This series follows Maggie and Mo. Well, Maggie is the daughter, Mo is her father, and one day in front of their apartment there's a stranger appearing, talking to Mo about a Capricorn that is looking for him and stuff, calling him Silver Tongue, I believe is the English translation, and so on, and talking a lot of strange things. And Maggie notices that Mo starts keeping secret, or has kept secrets from her, which he has never done. And when they then suddenly just, you know, leave to go visit their aunt, or Maggie's aunt, great aunt actually, just Maggie wonders what's going on. And so this series is one of my favorite childhood series. It's the series that made me fall in love with reading. This second book was one of the first books that ever made me cry, and I thought I would be okay rereading. I was not. I was sobbing so much. I was sobbing before it came. I was sobbing during all the hints and the little comments that characters made that would hint to what would come. And yeah, I love this book a lot. So let's see if I can get through the last two books while it's still blinking. The next one I will still keep short because I did already have a review filmed, not yet uploaded for this one, and that is The Weaver and the Witch Queen by Genevieve Gornichek, which is the sophomore novel by Genevieve Gornichek. I believe the first one was The Witch's Heart. This one, once again, is Norse inspired. It is kind of very loose historical fantasy. It is not a myth retelling, and we follow two women who were part of a pact of three as children. So it was two sisters and then their friend, and they made a pact to always be there for each other. But while growing up, while the two sisters just stayed on their farm and kind of helped their mother and their father, the other went off and kind of started learning how to be a witch. However, when one of the sisters is kidnapped by raiders, the two others, one of whom is a weaver, the other one who is now a witch, kind of have to come together again to try and save the sister. And it's a story about friendship, it's a story about taking power, it's a story about kind of womanhood in a way, or different ways how to be a woman. And I really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed the bittersweet ending of this one. There were some little things I think that didn't quite make it to be a 5-star for me. I don't remember them yet anymore though. Maybe I talked about them in my review. But yeah, I can just highly recommend it. I really enjoy it, and it was a really fast read. So now we're at the last book, and as promised, my 5-star read of December was another YA book. Not just a YA book, however, which I already don't read a lot of, but also in a genre that I typically never read, and that was Warrior Girl on Earth by Angeline Boulley, which is a YA thriller. I already loved Angeline Boulley's first book, which was Firekeeper's Daughter, which was an absolute out of the nowhere surprise to me. With this one, for half a year I've been dragging it with me, too scared to pick it up. This book follows a main character whose name I once again forgot. I remember that the sister's name was Pauline. But in this indigenous community, every summer there's this kind of project, I guess. Perry was the main character's name, by the way. There's this project where the teenagers kind of work or do internships at different departments within the tribal community, from like the chief's office to the sheriff's office to the museum, etc. And Perry originally didn't want to take part in the thing, but she is forced to by her aunt, who we know from the first book, after she crashes her new car. And so she starts an internship at the museum on Sugar Island, I believe it is called. And while there, she learns a lot about how museums deal with human remains of indigenous people. And she learns a lot about the laws of repatriation of objects from indigenous communities and to indigenous communities. And the whole thing kind of gets started when she visits the depot, I guess, of the college or university, I believe, that is closest to where their community is. And she is shown the remains of a young girl. And so this story is kind of centering what is done with bodies that are seen as objects. Both bodies that are alive, as in indigenous girls, but also bodies that are dead, as human remains. So why did it take me so long to pick this up? Some of you might not know, I work at the museum. I do not work at an ethnological museum. That would be a goal of mine, something that I want to do in the future. I do study anthropology as my master's right now, cultural and social anthropology, and museums and the structures of museums, the histories of museums, is something that I am first of all very interested in, but that is also very important to me, and that I have also done quite a bit of research on. Not as much American museums, but more so European museums. Which there's a lot of different things there that play into it. But basically, this book focuses on something that I am very passionate about, and it's by an author where I love the first book, but I wasn't sure if I loved the first book because it was kind of surprise, blown me out of the park. I didn't know what to expect, kind of 5-star, or because it was actually a 5-star. So I don't know if I would have enjoyed this book. Yeah, I was scared, okay? I ended up giving it 5 stars, obviously. I think story-wise, it's not as good as the first one. I think the first one just is a little bit tighter and is a little bit better written and better paced. I also enjoyed the romance more in the first one. However, I do really like how the second book approaches its topic, because you do get very different perspectives. You have perspectives of academics who do not care about properly handling these objects. You have perspectives of academics who do care. You have perspectives of Perry, who is very new to all of this and is just reading into the laws and into the history. And even though she is growing up as an indigenous girl, she obviously has, you know, it comes as a surprise to her how many museums actually deal with these objects. that really shouldn't be objects but should be subjects. I'm talking about human remains. There is a whole thing also within museology or museum studies, within like anthropology, when we talk about these things, like there is like raising awareness about what to do with these things, and there's a whole thing what exactly can count as an object and what shouldn't count as an object, is what I'm saying. Anyway, I really have to be careful to not just go into a whole ass ramble here. And then you also have the perspective of Cooper, who is the director at the museum on Sugar Island, who is indigenous and who has had to deal with these people, I'm talking people from museums and academics, showing no respect for just decades probably. And so I really enjoyed all of those different perspectives, and I just overall really enjoyed the book. And there's also a full list of secondary sources in the back, which I definitely have to go into more. But yeah, I love it. If you want some indigenous contemporary books, definitely check out Angeline Boulley. And with that, we have come to an end of this wrap-up, of my last wrap-up of 2023. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have read any of the books and have any thoughts that you want to share on them, tell me in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below as well, so go and check those out. Right now we're reading Starling House by Alex E. Harrell. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye.